As a young lady, my dream was to be in a happy marriage to a great man with a humanitarian heart. I figured my best chances of finding this man would be among the Christians, because the head of the Christian religion is the greatest man who ever lived, with the greatest and most humanitarian heart. And I fell madly in love with Jesus for being so great, self sacrificing, and loving. I was determined to marry somebody as much like him as possible. I was a pretty girl, but took my looks for granted because many girls are pretty when they're young. I figured the way I would stand out to get that great man would be to be pretty and to have inner greatness as well. I also wanted to go into an occupation that would enhance that image, and I dreamed of being married to a missionary doctor. To me, that would be very close to Jesus, somebody who's smart, deep, humanitarian, and great. I don't know why, but as a young lady, I didn't get that many dates. I think my depth scared the guys away. I concluded that I was too manly for the men and needed to be more womanly, so I suppressed my manly traits, which were many, and tried to force myself into a feminine mold to get my dream man. This only made matters worse. The intelligent, deep guys, the ones I wanted, could tell that I wasn't myself. And because I didn't know who I was, they didn't know either. Rather than try to figure me out, they moved on to easier pastures, and I would go on a date and talk about how I admired all I should admire, and denied to myself any beliefs or thoughts that weren't expressly Christian, conservative, and acceptable to the church crowd. In spite of this, I did date a Jewish guy who was the exact opposite of all I espoused to be, and fell crazy for him because he was deep and intelligent, something that I wasn't finding as easily as I thought I could. But he too could tell I was a confused mess, so he too abandoned me for easier pastures. I concluded that I was losing my dream man because I still needed to be the epitome of all a Christian girl should be, and I despised myself for my weakness to date that Jewish guy, who I suspected tainted me to the Christian guys who knew I dated him. They couldn't understand why I'd date a liberal Jewish guy when I claimed to be a Christian. To be honest with you, I didn't understand why I did it either. I think it was the subconscious inside of me screaming out for me to be real and myself. But I was too insecure. And I just would remember all my mom said to me growing up about how inferior I was. And I felt I had to adhere to ridiculously high standards to compensate for that and be acceptable to my dream man. So these rejections by the men who I wanted made me go deeper into my trench, and I became more rigid, more conservative, and aligned myself with the fundamental Baptist movement, who I who felt that wearing pants was a sin, all rock music was bad, and women should dress so modestly that the neckline should be almost to the neck. I became a proud Victorian woman and embraced Victorian ideals and dreamed of a Victorian husband like missionary Dr. Hudson Taylor. I never lost my dream, though, of wanting a deep, intelligent man. So I still dreamed about a man like a missionary doctor. That's what Hudson Taylor was, by the way. I knew my standards were very high, but I was determined to get my dream man or bust. For this reason, I kept myself a virgin until I married, to be sure I didn't come off as tarnished goods. But I did have periods where I doubted whether I was on the right path to finding my dream man and dabbled with the Southern Baptists for a while, thinking perhaps the fundamental Baptists were too strict. But I ended up dating a missionary doctor's son who tried to bed me, and I rejected him for that. And I said no. Then he turned me down. So I felt the Southern Baptists that God was punishing me for joining up with them. So I left them and went to a stricter group and to so that God wouldn't be mad at me. That's what I was thinking. and I even made a list of all the things my dream man needed to be: a virgin like me, no rock music, a dedicated Christian who would do anything for Jesus. So I married David Schuler because when I told him on our dates that they could be talk only, no hand holding, no nothing, he said he admired me for this. He even agreed with me. So I ended up marrying him without even holding his hand or even kissing, or we had no physical contact on any date. Just like the rules of the Bible college that I went to, the very strict Bible college. I said, this is a sure winner. I knew I had the marriage that would be gloriously happy and last forever. That was 1985. The first year was pretty good, and never having had sex, I was enjoying the missionary position with my husband all the time. That's all I knew, and it worked for me. But after about a year of marriage, I started figuring out that my husband loved the respect of the church more than me. I had a baby in 1987, and I don't know why, but after the birth, I had trouble sleeping, and I eventually went to a psychiatrist seeking a cure to my insomnia and got talked into believing that I had bipolar disorder, which wasn't the case. But it labeled me in my religious community, and they started saying that I was demon possessed. My Canadian obstetrician, when I lived on the Michigan border at that time, thought that I suffered from postpartum depression at first because I broke down in tears in his office and said, I can't sleep. He thought the tears were depression. Actually, if I was depressed, it was because I couldn't sleep. But now I had a label on me, and my strict religious community believed that anybody diagnosed with a mental illness was demon possessed. In fact, the pastor of the King James Bible only church I went to recommended that I give up my baby for adoption because of my postpartum depression that I thought I had at the time. See, he couldn't have kids, so he figured anybody who had postpartum depression should give their kid up for adoption to people like him. My husband kept this from me. He also told my husband that I was demon possessed. My husband kept this from me and still had me go to that church. He confessed this to me in Miami, Florida after we were transferred out of Michigan. Now I knew my husband was married to church opinion more than his love for me. He only cared about being important to the church, and he didn't care about me. I was just an instrument to that end. But I also sensed that he was never pleased with me because I would do things that ruined his good church image. At this point, I began watching TV shows to escape from my marriage. The man I married to was not my dream man that I wanted in my 20s. He was shallow, obsessed with church opinion, and he wasn't a real and genuine Christ follower. But divorce was out of the question for me. I didn't have scriptural grounds, I felt, which was death, desertion, or adultery, or so I thought. Actually, my husband fooled me. I thought he was just an overly rigid church man, and he had a secret life that I didn't know anything about. When he was out on his deployments, he was doing stuff I didn't know about, but Jesus knew. But anyways, I needed an escape. The first show that helped me deal with his rigidity and coldness was Anne of Green Gables, and I fell in love with Gilbert Blythe, the deep, intelligent physician. Oh, I wanted Gilbert. But that show only lasted for the miniseries, and I no longer had any more escape to watch. So I latched on to Star Trek The Next Generation next, and I found my Gilbert Blythe and Lieutenant Commander Data, Brent Spiner's character. I didn't dream about sex with any of these men because I was clearly wrong. And my husband brought coldness to me, but in my dream world, I could escape it. And I concluded that this dream man didn't exist, but I had to believe in him in my dream world, or I couldn't be happy. But then I ended up watching Pen Pals in Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Brent played a character there who went against the approval of his peers to do what was right, the exact opposite of my husband. And at that point, I had to write Brent Spiner. I said, this is the man I know. I wish I was married to. Somebody who follows his heart, the greatness in his heart, to go against the grain, even if he loses the respect of his peers. So my husband, all he cared about was the respect of his peers. So from 1989 to 1991, Brent Spiner became my pen pal. And to my amazement, I figured out that he was reading my mail. Because in certain episodes, like the drumhead, it paralleled my life that I was telling him about in my writings. There was a time I was in danger of losing my son to the state, which is a lot like, sort of like drumhead. And my husband laughed me off as ridiculous for worrying about it. But Brent Spiner he got behind me. He went to the news. He had episodes that exposed government intrusion into the family. Now he became my hero. And I knew he wasn't just a dream man. He really existed. Then we moved to Seattle, closer to LA where Brent lived, and he called me on the phone and made love to me, and I didn't know it was him at first, so I hung up on him. But then when I got his music album, Oh Yellow Eyes Is Back, I realized he was making love to me on the phone. See, his real voice is tenor, and he actually kind of goes baritone when he portrays Data, so I didn't pick up that it was him right away. When I realized he made all Yellow Eyes for me, I realized my dream man existed, and it was Brent. But Brent told me to keep Brent as a pen friend, no sex, and to wait for his timing. It was very hard for me. And I had to have a lot of faith in Jesus. But while I waited, I decided to train myself to write so I could help Brent out in his career. So I thought maybe I could write screenplays for him to act in. I wanted him to win like an Oscar, you know. It was my way of being a wife to him that I longed to be, but couldn't morally. You know, I wanted to be morally in every other way. I wanted to be close to him. So writing was my way of being a wife to Brent. And so I patterned my first novel to represent our love. And the main character was kind of like me and Doris, stuck in a cold marriage, couldn't get out. And his love interest was the part of me that was free and who was his solace and soulmate. But when I was about 75% done with the book, I learned about Laurie McBride. I read about her in the Houston Chronicle, and then she gave me writer's block. I lost all desire to honor Brent with my writings and just totally gave up writing. And I never really got my novel writing skills back until this year when I finished Bible for Tribulation Saints and realized that by only including the transcripts that involved Jesus, I had written a masterpiece. And Jesus was the author of Bible for Tribulation Saints. He used that to show me how to write again. And I noticed that Jesus followed Save the Cat by Blake Snyder and how he set up Bible for Tribulation Saints. So Jesus used Bible for Tribulation Saints and Save the Cat to teach me how to do my future stories. And following Save the Cat, I realized that the last scene that I wrote in Silver Skies before I got writer's block was right before the all is lost scene. So I've put on an ending to Silver Skies, and it's going to make it very powerful. The ending I put on it in 2005 was no good. That was before I really regained my writing skills. My men have established a movie studio for all my writings, and it's become a powerhouse in Hollywood, with ratings for all our productions going through the roof. Laurie McBride, who's behind Star Trek Discovery and much of Hollywood now, is furious because she can't compete with our ratings. And in most of my stories, the lovers need to believe in the greatness inside of themselves to find the courage to stay true to love, because Satan always makes us doubt. Check out the links underneath this page. And so basically, my men, they've created a movie studio based on my writings. And I realize now that as I worked on Bible for Tribulation Saints, that Jesus was giving me a crash course on how to write a great novel. See, basically all I did was pick the transcripts where Jesus showed up and just put them in Bible for Tribulation Saints or anything related to that. And when I went back and analyzed Bible for Tribulation Saints, I was able to break down all the plot points just like Blake Snyder does it in Save the Cat. And I thought, wow, Jesus actually had me transcribe Bible for Tribulation Saints to give me a crash course on how to write a great novel. And I went back and looked at Silver Skies and says, why is it that I can't get really excited about this story anymore? I mean, it just doesn't work for me. And I realized, Gail, it's because your ending doesn't work. It says, if you would set it up like Blake Snyder says in Save the Cat, and it's a love story, whereas Bible for Tribulation Saints is a superhero story with Zach Knight as the main character, but in Silver Skies is a love story. So I went and plotted it according to Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, and I'm really excited about what I came up with. I can't give it to you or I'll be giving you spoilers, but I hear that Steven Spielberg is at the head of the new movie studio they've created. They started making a television series out of Bible for Tribulation Saints. The ratings went through the roof, and this new studio has become an overnight powerhouse in Hollywood. And all the men on my marriage, listen, 80% of them work for Hollywood, have signed a contract with that studio, and they no longer have to work for Laurie McBride to make a living. Laurie McBride has basically taken over Hollywood. They can work for this studio, and they don't have to compromise their moral convictions or their heart to make a living. So I'm so glad my writings have done that for them.